The voice of sharing, Durian ASEAN.
Hello everyone, good morning. You're with Gowri today. Arlene is still in Myanmar. She's busy with her ASEAN summit that she's been attending since last Friday actually. So you're listening to us on the ABC News. So let's move on to the news today. Before that, just so you guys know, you can not only listen to us online now, you can also listen to us on your phone. You just have to download the TuneIn app and look for Durian ASEAN. And don't forget to also check us out on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. So before we go to the news today, I just want to share with you guys that this ASEAN summit has been really great according to Arlene. She's been there for a while now, and she's been having lots of fun. She's been getting lots of input, meeting a lot of great people there, and she'll be joining us tomorrow. So the first news that we have for today is by the Sydney Morning Herald. Missing Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 puzzle raises legal problems. The lack of any evidence indicating what caused flight MH370's disappearance raises a legal conundrum that is expected to force Malaysia Airlines into out-of-court settlements with angry next-of-kin, aviation law experts say. More than 2 months since MH370 disappeared, no wreckage has been found to even confirm a crash, let alone apportion blame. But relatives of these 239 people on board can still pursue Malaysian Airlines because under the international aviation law, it is actually an airline's responsibility to prove that it was not to blame for an accident. On the surface, though, Malaysia Airlines is responsible, said Jeremy Joseph, a Malaysian attorney specializing in transport law. The burden of proof rests on the national carrier to clear its name, he added. But Malaysia Airlines is also vulnerable to civil lawsuits for potentially greater damages by hundreds of relatives already infuriated by the lack of information. No legal moves have yet been made as families closely monitor an immensely difficult search in vast ocean depths that has so far found nothing. So we all know that this Beijing-bound plane disappeared on the 8th of March, and according to the authorities, it is believed to have crashed in the Indian Ocean. And the search went on for 2 weeks, but they found nothing. And there have been lots of theories about a terrorist act, a rogue pilot, even some mechanical problems. A U.S. law firm is already planning a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against Malaysia Airlines and aircraft maker Boeing on behalf of an Indonesian passenger's family. Malaysia Airlines has also begun making some payouts to families, but has declined to reveal the details. And the next news is a follow-up to the first one. It seems that the first funeral ever for an MH370 passenger was held last week by an Aussie family. So the headline goes, MH370 funeral. Aussie family decides to hold memorial service in Brisbane on Sunday. The first funerals for passengers on board a Malaysian Airlines jet will be held this weekend, said relatives on Friday, as a Malaysian official urged relatives of those presumed dead to face reality and leave support centers. Almost 8 weeks later, Malaysian Airlines has said that it will close assistance centers that it has set up in Beijing and Kuala Lumpur for the families of the 239 passengers and crew on board for the Boeing jet. Many of the bereaved are Chinese nationals. On Friday, Malaysia's Deputy Foreign Minister said it was time for relatives to be realistic. Well, that is really harsh. He also said that we have been waiting to come up with a statement, and all of us, be it the family members or the whole world, is actually looking for an answer, Hamzah Zainuddin told at a news conference. The airline, he said, had been looking after and supporting family members in Beijing for nearly 55 days. And that's the reason that it is about time for us to actually accept the reality that these family members should go back and wait for the answer in their hometowns. Malaysian officials also said that developments in the search and those qualified would receive prompt compensation. Well, so this does sound pretty harsh that these authorities are telling the families to just face reality and go home, like they're gone. But in a way, they also have a point, because just waiting around at these assistance centers is not gonna help anyone. It's not gonna assist any of the operation. They're still distraught. They are still devastated. So it's probably best that they just go home and wait for a call from the authorities. So moving on to Thailand now. Reported by the ABC News, Thailand wants people to stay away from protests. Thailand's caretaker government said on Sunday that it would tighten security to prevent clashes that could arise between the two sides in an escalating political crisis, and warned people to stay away from protest sites for their own safety. The announcement was broadcast on television as pro-government and anti-government protesters held competing rallies in Bangkok over the weekend. The two groups were several kilometers apart, but concerns of violence have risen following a court's ouster of Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra last week. Senior security official warned that if the anti-government movement carries out an attempt to appoint an unelected prime minister, it would ignite anger from the government supporters that could definitely spread to clashes and could eventually lead to a civil war between the two groups. The comment echoed one made a day earlier by the head of the pro-government red shirt movement. Two people were actually injured last Saturday when a couple of unknown assailants fired 2 grenades at the government house, the Prime Minister's office compound where these anti-government protesters were camped, said their police officer. And officials vacated the compound months ago due to protests launched against the Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra in November. It was the latest in a series of grenade attacks and drive-by shootings that have left hundreds of people injured since Thailand's political crisis escalated in November. Both sides accused the other of orchestrating the violence. So Yingluck's cabinet has actually named a deputy premier, who is Niwattumrong Bunsong Paisan, as the acting prime minister. But the leader of the anti-government protest movement said that he doesn't hold the authority and the status to be the head of the government. So apparently they have someone on their side who they would prefer to be the current premier, the current acting prime minister, while the cabinet has also appointed someone, and that is causing a major rift here. And the next news, Thailand government supporters warn on installing unelected prime minister. Like the previous news said, how the leader of the opposition party has a problem with the elected prime minister, and the government is also warning the opposition party of installing an unelected prime minister. Supporters of Thailand's embattled government warned the country against judiciary and senators against any attempt to install unelected prime minister, saying it would be a disaster for the nation that could spark civil war. Jatupon Prompan, who heads the pro-government red shirt movement, made the comment during a rally on Saturday on the western edge of Bangkok that was held 3 days after Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra was ousted in a controversial ruling by the Constitutional Court. It was the latest in a series of grenade attacks and drive-by shootings that have left hundreds injured. Appointing an unelected prime minister will inflict a crisis on the nation, because the only solution for Thailand is democracy under the king as a head of state, pretty much like what we have here in Malaysia. I want my voice to be heard by the presidents of 3 courts and the Senate, that you are going to create a disaster in the nation, he also said. You are going to create a serious crisis that could lead to civil war. that no one wants to see. So let's move on to Vietnam. In a jittery Vietnam, protesters slammed China amid maritime tensions. So if you guys don't already know, China has been trying to expand its territories, and they've been building oil rigs in the Vietnam waters together with armed guards. So the people in Vietnam cannot really do anything about it. So what they're doing now is the best that they can do is to protest outside the Chinese embassy in Hanoi. So several hundred protesters demonstrated peacefully outside the Chinese embassy in Hanoi, Vietnam's capital, on Sunday, criticizing the country's giant northern neighbor amid heightened tensions over maritime standoff in the South China Sea. Similar anti-China protests occur sporadically here, often in response to perceived Chinese maritime aggression, and the government grudgingly tolerates them before arresting and dispersing protesters using uniformed police officers and gangs with video cameras who are widely presumed to be security agents. So a literary critic said that we don't have a problem with Chinese people or their culture, but we resent their government conspiring against us. The maritime standoff with China, which has controlled the islands since 1974, has been a hot topic in Vietnam's state-controlled media on Facebook, where vast majority of the country's urban middle class communicates. But although there were many are actually adamant that China should remove its oil rig, known as the HD 981 actually, from the disputed waters, some also criticized Vietnam's handling of the dispute, saying that the government should be more assertive. And I think I have to agree with them here, because while they were actually protesting peacefully in front of the embassy, the police actually tried to disperse them and even arresting some of the protesters, when I think they should be joining these protesters because they're doing this for the good of Vietnam. You don't want somebody coming into your country trying to assert the authority in your country, and obviously people are going to rebel, people are going to protest, and the government shouldn't be against the people. It should join the people in this protest. And the foreign ministry has not even issued any statements about this dispute since Wednesday, when it held a high-profile news briefing in central Hanoi, featuring senior officials and the executive of Petro-Vietnam, the state oil and gas monopoly. So I really think that the Vietnam government should call for a press conference, should maybe clarify about what's happening. Are they having a dialogue with China, with the Prime Minister of China? What are they doing? How are they trying to solve this problem? Because their people are definitely not happy about what's happening. So from Vietnam, now we move on to Singapore. And this is a news reported by the New York Times. It seems that in the new textbook in Singapore, the story of Singapore begins 500 years earlier. Singapore has rewritten the history taught in secondary school to expand the story of the island's state birth. While earlier generations learned a narrative that essentially Singapore started in 1819 with the British colonial administrator Stamford Raffles stumbling upon a sleepy Malay fishing village. 13-year-olds now learn of a golden age that started 500 years earlier. So this came behind the revision that is the work of John N. Miksic, who is an American archaeology professor at the National University of Singapore, who advised the government on the new school textbook, Singapore, The Making of a Nation, 1300 to 1975, as opposed to 1819. So that is really 500 years before. An education ministry official who declined to be named in line with the government policy called the change a shift rather than a rewrite, saying that it allowed students to explore Singapore's origin as a part of Call and her connections to the region and the world. So why did it take 30 years to change the story? Apparently it takes overwhelming evidence to shift the mindset of people from one image of its past to another, the professor said in an interview at his campus laboratory. The professor's team also found evidence of the ancient city center, framed by an earthen rampart, and defenses that Raffles mentioned in letters. Among 30,000 artifacts from the 14th century were Chinese coins and pottery, Indian glass bangles, and gold jewelry. So moving on to China and also the ASEAN summit talks in Myanmar. Reported by the ABC News, Vietnam and Philippines on Sunday pushed for stronger action to confront China's aggressive behavior in the South China Sea at the first Southeast Asian summit hosted by Myanmar. They are hoping to demonstrate the progress it's made since emerging from military rule. A showdown between Chinese and Vietnam ships near the Paracel Islands has put a spotlight on the long-standing and bitter maritime disputes. The stakes are high, with Beijing claiming sovereignty over much of the strategically important waters, which are among the world's busiest transport lanes and believed to contain significant oil and gas reserves. Several members of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations reject China's claims, saying parts of the sea are theirs. But few are willing to risk their political and economic relationship with the regional powerhouse. China has actually moved its deep water drilling rig, escorted by over 80 armed and military vessels and many airplanes too, to the Vietnamese water, said Vietnamese Prime Minister Nguyen Thanh Dung as quoted. Philippine President Benigno Aquino III meanwhile said that he intended to raise his country's own territorial dispute with Beijing, while calling for support to resolve the conflict through international arbitration. ASEAN leaders are also discussed tensions of the Korean Peninsula, reiterating their commitment to a region of free nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction, according to the draft of the final statement. The United States, of course, has criticized China's latest action as provocative and unhelpful. So this news also relates to our next one, which is about the implications of the Philippines and U.S. military deal, which has been incited by also China's claim on the territorial waters in Philippines, like it's doing with Vietnam, except that Philippines is actually taking some steps to overcome this problem. And what they did is they signed a pact with the U.S. So President Barack Obama's visit to the Philippines in the last leg of his recent four-nation Asian tour produced a new bilateral defense agreement that was touted by some observers as the single most significant outcome of his regional foray. The agreement was said to contribute to his goals of reassuring allies and signaling that the United States is serious about its rebalance to Asia. So the new EDCA, which is actually the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, would grant American troops, ships, planes, rotational access to facilities of the armed forces of the Philippines, but not permanent bases, which are actually prohibited under the Philippines Constitution, with the result of reducing response time should an external threat from a common adversary crystallize. So, according to this pact, the Philippines and U.S. are inclined to help each other in case one of them is attacked. And we can see where this is going, with China pressuring Philippines and going into their territory and threatening their sovereignty, actually. And Obama was otherwise non-specific about the South China disputes, merely expressing support for the Philippines as an approach of seeking arbitration under UNCLOS for its dispute with China over maritime resources and entitlements in the South China Sea. He also reiterated that the long-standing U.S. position, international law must be upheld, the freedom of navigation must be preserved, and commerce must not be impeded. The message that the Philippines, though, should draw from the visit is that this EDCA provides it with a window of opportunity to work doubly hard on its own defense modernization, together with the U.S. assistance through training and acquisitions toward the end goal of developing what Manila has called minimum credible defense capability. But Manila must, of course, remain cautious and not take Washington's support for granted when it comes to a possible confrontation with China. Some in Manila doubt that the U.S.-China cooperation on a wide range of bilateral, regional, and global concerns remains very important to the United States. So Obama hasn't actually said that he was here solely for the sake of protecting Philippines. He said it was more of a general interest for all the ASEAN countries, but we do know that they have signed this pact and now they've kind of got each other's backs. And should China pressure Philippines even more, I'm guessing that the United States is going to come in and do something about it. Well, we'll move on to another news reported by the Sydney Morning Herald. And this is not in ASEAN, but it is an important news that I have to share with you, especially since just yesterday was Mother's Day. It's the unconscionable act. Michelle Obama speaks out on Nigerian schoolgirl abductions. So, in a rare venture into foreign policy, Michelle Obama on Saturday condemned the abduction of more than 200 Nigerian schoolgirls by terrorists and said that she and her husband had been personally touched by what she called an unconscionable act. In this, girls, Barack and I see our own daughters, the First Lady said in a weekly radio address that is normally delivered by her husband. We see their hopes, their dreams, and we can only imagine the anguish that their parents are feeling right now. So just imagine how the mothers must have felt yesterday when it was Mother's Day and their daughters are all missing and the government is also not doing much about it. So Barack Obama said last week that he had ordered a team of military intelligence to actually host negotiators to Nigeria to help in the search. The kidnapping of the girls has prompted a viral internet campaign on their behalf, with people around the world taking to Twitter and other social media to demand the return of their girls to their families. The First Lady was also seen posing with a sign that says, "Bring back our girls," written on it. In the radio address, she said she wanted to use Mother's Day to draw in even more attention to the kidnappings. So Boko Haram, the Nigerian terrorist network, has actually claimed responsibility for the 276 girls from a school last month. The taking of the girls and concern about their fate has prompted nations around the world to offer help to the Nigerian government of President Goodluck Jonathan. Michelle Obama usually stays out and doesn't get meddled in foreign policy issues, and she focuses most of her activities as First Lady on issues such as reducing childhood obesity and more of all these social issues. But it's good that she has actually taken a change and she has stepped up and brought this to the attention of a lot of people. And a lot of celebrities are also seen on Facebook and Twitter posing with signs that says, "Real men don't buy girls," including Emma Watson. So that's all the time that we have for today. Don't forget to tune in tomorrow, same time, 8 a.m. with more news. After this, we have Blast from the Grassroots session with a poet-songwriter, Satria. And we'll be back in less than 10 minutes, so stay tuned with us.